Having been a fan of Van and Bonnie's for decades, I heard David Bush being interviewed on the morning show, and I was very curious to hear more about Van's journey. And so I'd been praying for many, it seemed like years, for Roy's conscience and experience to be pricked to improve his health. And so I took this opportunity to ask him if he would be willing to go, and he very graciously, well, maybe graciously, he agreed to go regardless. And so that was the beginning of how we got into the door. And it was, you guys were spot on with the speakers. Van obviously was what our draw, and oh, I can't remember the other guy's name. Edit that out.
There's Aaron Thomas.
Aaron Thomas, yes, yes. Him speaking about platform and opportunity and how that might be coming from a place not positive, but can be used of God.
Knowing that she is a WHO listener to the nth degree and has been for many years, as she said, Jean told me about this conference. And coming into it, I was a tad bit skeptical, maybe, but I knew it meant a great deal to her. And while I was skeptical, I guess I would acknowledge that I was also a little bit open to it, because I knew that I was at a level of poor health that was not going to serve me well going forward. You know, one of the keys for me is that, yes, it did include things like physical activity.
Okay, let's start over. What did it inspire?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, during the Inspire conference, I found that they were addressing an area that really had not been actively engaged in my life anyway. I was used to hearing things around physical activity, around diet, but what really happened to me that was significant at the Inspire conference is that it suddenly dawned on me it really is a spiritual issue. And I remember saying to someone, you know, this is a lordship issue. And with lordship, sometimes it's kind of one big yes, followed by a whole lot of uh-huhs. And that's what this was going to become for me, is I knew I had to make some choices, and that they weren't going to be just choices about what I eat alone or what I do from an activity standpoint, but it was choice about, am I going to be available for kingdom work? And I knew as my years have been progressing, 30 years sitting at a desk and being very inactive, that my next 20 years were not going to be very productive for the kingdom.
And I didn't know what to expect from the Inspire conference. I was pleasantly surprised as I walked in. I saw some familiar faces, and I'm glad to report that when I walked out, I had some new acquaintances. So that was a blessing. Our strategy was during the breakout sessions, he would go to one and I would go to another, so we could cover a lot of ground. And we went together for the Fit for the King session, which was phenomenal and opened our eyes to many things about availability, both financially, physically, about how we can be available to say yes to God and opportunities that come our way. That was a new thought, and I remember chasing David down the hall afterwards and tapping him on the shoulder and saying, this was phenomenal. I've never heard this message before. In all my decades of going to church and going to different Christian programs, I've not heard that message. This was the book that we were handed as we entered, and I think there might be a need for some additional room in your next program, but there, you see, there's many things that I took away, and I enjoyed that there was a wide variety of topics, anything from sports injuries to cooking, but I took home a lot, as you can very well see.
Well, for me, the follow-up from the Inspire conference was at a couple different levels. One is just God's Spirit continued to prompt just my own heart, is I realized I had three idols that were not serving me and certainly not honoring God. And so I realized that if I were going to continue on the path I was on, then I was giving myself to three idols. And those idols were comfort, convenience, and calories. And so I didn't want to have to do something different. So it felt like it might be inconvenient, and I wanted to demand convenience. I also like not only the comfort of my recliner, but just comfort foods. And then recognizing that demand that I was making in terms of my own lifestyle was definitely not honoring God. And so I really had to come to grips with all three of those idols. So as far as the next step, for both of us, we went to a follow-up class and really enjoyed that David and Joe facilitated. And it was during that, I think, again, that some of the questions and some of the issues God just used again to really provide some clarity. And so by the end of those 7 weeks, I knew that I needed to make another type step. So I asked Joe if he would be kind enough to work with me. And so we've been doing that now for about 5 months. Bottom line for me is I've dropped about 32 pounds. So I'm about halfway to where I want to be. But more importantly, I'm just more available. I can tell that I can move easier, and I want that to continue.
Well, there was no question that we wouldn't come back. We definitely walked out the door knowing we were going to come back should you have it again. And one of the things I'm hoping to fulfill is to recruit other people to come and hear messages that would minister to their hearts and their availability. And you don't ever just hear a message and then it's one and done. You've got to spruce it up, you've got to freshen it up, you've got to hear new voices. And we would like to, I think, be a part of those voices that help other people turn their lives to a new beginning. 6 years before the last Inspire conference, I stumbled upon my physical fitness regime that I have been able to stick with for 6 years. So in watching his health and inactivity decline, of course my concern raised over all these years. And his mother and I have been praying that something would spur him on. And I had thought, well, maybe it's going to be our daughter's wedding. You know, that will help him work, or our granddaughter. Well, in fact, he had a hip replacement. I was waiting for one of these things to really knock his socks off, and nothing was happening. But we continued to pray, his mother and I, and other people were praying for him. And I found that as a wife, you have to be supportive, but do it in a way that is uplifting, and wait for opportunities to interject maybe a concern or a point. But I really wanted to be his cheerleader. And I'm very, very grateful to the work that you've all done through Fit for the King and the Inspire Conference, because it really has enabled me to step into that role of being cheerleader. I've never been more proud, and my respect for him has grown exponentially. I'm very grateful. And the fact that he'll get up in the morning and go downstairs and work out for 20 minutes before a meal, before breakfast, that's mind-blowing. And that's the Lord working in his heart.
This has really been the first time in my life in doing exercise that I've come to a point that if I've not done it for the day, I notice it. And otherwise it would have been, oh great, I didn't have to do anything today. But that's not been happening now. That's been a really important corner to turn.